sucker, man. Shit is a creep. It's a setup, it's a setup, it's a setup. There's an O, it's a setup, it's a setup, it's a setup. There's an O, it's a setup, it's a setup. Don't be setup. There's an O, it's a setup, it's a setup. Don't be setup. There's an O, it's a setup, it's a setup. Don't be setup. There's an O, it's a setup, it's a setup. Don't be setup. There's an O, it's a setup, it's a setup. Don't be setup. There's a trailer, there's a mo, it's a beast. Don't be Good morning, everybody. Morning. Welcome back to day 3, you hardy souls. We're going to try to get started a little early today. We know there's always a challenge in getting the right flights out of Tahoe. It's always easier to get in than out. So we're going to start a little bit early and see if we can get you to the airport on time. I wanted a couple of reminders. The videos of all of the sessions so far are already, most of them from the last 2 days are already posted at the agenda. You can go back to the agenda and find them there. You're free to share them, embed them, do as you will with them. We're also reporting on this and streaming it live at mediapost.com, so ping your friends if they want to tune in. We're also, before we get started, I want to remind everybody I am always looking for suggestions. I've already spoken to a number of you about some of the things that I'm looking for as we program future shows, both the one-day programmatic shows and future summits. I'm always looking for case studies. I really love examples. I want to talk about get more of those up here. So if you have ideas for panel sessions, new topics we need to talk about, cases that you really want to put in front of me, please ping me. You all know my email, or go to mediapost.com and you can grab me, and please send me suggestions. I live for them. So we were going to wrap today. We've been talking, the topic and the challenge of cross-channel has been with us throughout the last 3 days. Yesterday, for instance, Steph's presentation about what EA is doing, almost, I think to many of us, felt like a moonshot in the sense that the ways in which they're planning on integrating the depth of data that they have across their own brands and across players and pinging them through such a sophisticated series of triggers across different platforms is amazing. Not everyone has the data to do that or has the ability to reorganize to do that. In fact, I think most of you probably have much more rudimentary challenges when it comes to knitting that data together. So we want to wrap the final keynote of the summit, taking up that topic with Ian Johnson, who's the EVP and Managing Director of Global Products for Cadreon. You all know Cadreon. It's IPG's ad tech platform. He comes to this from one of the devices that really helped disrupt our notion of how to knit data together, and that's mobile. He worked at Vodafone for a number of years, started his own ad tech company at AdInfuse, and of course at Cadreon he oversees the delivery of ad solutions across the IPG clients. Please welcome Ian Johnson.
Thank you. So yeah, just to introduce myself, I'm an engineer by training and a geek by nature. So this idea of being able to identify who is me through the different devices that I use is very interesting to me, and it gets to be part of my day job now. From Steve's introduction, it sounds like you may all know Cadreon, but since this deck was put together by our marketing team, I feel I have to give the sales pitch a little bit. And if you look at Illumiscape, you'll probably find us in the agency trading desk kind of quadrant. And that's probably where we started. But today, we're really the ad tech unit for media brands. We deliver a lot of the buying solutions and data solutions used across the media brands' agencies. And there's basically kind of three components at our core. The first is that we work with many of the best ad tech companies in the world. And we work with many of the best rather than the best because simply we just don't think one partner can do it all. And if you're going to work with multiple partners, you need to pull it together seamlessly. So we've actually built a technology layer, we call it Unity, which allows us to bring in consolidated reporting, consolidated campaign management, and also consolidated audience insights and targeting. And that is basically the plug-and-play architecture that we use. With that, we can start to build cross-platform intelligence. So if I'm learning something over here, I want to apply it to my social campaign, for example. And so using this approach, we can break down not only the inherent walls that you get between different platforms, but the walled gardens that some of the publishers kind of put in place. And then the final bit is we're digital at the core. Obviously, Programmatic started as being a digital medium, but actually the fastest growing part of our business at the moment is advanced TV, where we're basically bringing programmatic principles to TV buying. And by digital at core, what we mean is we're working with big data, not panel-sized data, but big data, terabytes worth of data. And we're trying to shorten the time from that insight to action. We'd like to do it in real time. We try to get close to real time as we humanly can. So that's kind of what Cadreon's doing these days. And as you can see, we work with some of the leading brands in the world. So if you take nothing away from this presentation, the highlight message is, if you're a consumer, and you are all consumers, you want to adopt the latest, coolest gadget, right? The latest, coolest service. And gosh only knows where that's going to come from. The problem is agencies, we get a little bit stuck in our ways. And so sometimes we're not actually adapting as fast as the market is adopting. And that can lead us to do some things that are somewhat suboptimum for our clients. So what are some of the adoptions that you see? So the first thing is that 60% of all of you, well, apparently 100% of all of you, but across the market, 67% of people access their content through multiple devices. For the mobile generation, the millennials, there's only 13% of them that only use a mobile device. Even millennials use multiple devices to do anything. 1 out of 5 minutes, waking minutes of a millennial is on a smartphone. If it's my son, I would put that as conscious minutes, because even when he's daydreaming, he seems to be on his smartphone. Nearly 80% of the US adult population have a smartphone. Obviously, YouTube content consumption is going doubling each year. But the one that I think is really interesting is that if you have a task to do, like buy something, you don't do it on a single device. 90% of people switch screens to actually complete a task. This picture here on the left is actually Google data. And this is from their DoubleClick database where they have cross-device tracking. And what it's showing you is that in average, you'll have 2 to 3 devices that you use for a transaction. And so I'll let you inwardly digest, but just to explain the key. So on the top row, you have 65% of start their journey on a smartphone. 61% of that 65% then go to a PC. and then 4% transact or finalize on a tablet. So tablets are red, smartphones are blue, and PCs are yellow in this diagram. And there's multiple reasons for that, right? And that could be just that the content optimization that you find on the smartphone may mean that you actually find it harder to find the thing that you're looking for, or you haven't got the amount of detail that you're looking for. So that may cause you to switch screen. Similarly, it may be sensitive information. You know, your particular e-commerce site password may be sitting on a Post-it in your home office and not readily at hand when you're out on your mobile phone trying to buy something. Time constraints. You may be going between tasks trying to complete something, and you just time out. So next time you're in front of another device at home, glass of whiskey in hand, and that's the time you want to buy the holiday. Or conversely, slow connection. You don't want to press that go buy button if you think it's going to hang. So maybe you wait to get home to get on a good Wi-Fi connection. So who knows, but 90% of us have multiple devices that we use to transact. And when you start looking at your different clients and your different brands, and the different kind of conversion goals that you're trying to get to, you'll find that the consumer journey varies significantly from this average that was put together by Google. So they're using multiple devices. And if you're a consumer, again, what you really want is to access your content anytime, anywhere, on any device. And I'd argue that what we've been doing in the advertising industry is basically try to leverage this dynamic. So you'll have the mobile guy, media buyer in the agency, trying to maximize the ad exposure through the mobile. Similarly, you've got the guy going through the desktop, you've got the guy focusing on paid social, and you're basically trying to maximize the exposure to hopefully stimulate engagement with your brand. And we all know that's wrong, right? You want to deliver the right creative at the right time, in the right place, over the right device. And that's the thing that actually cross-device allows us to get to. So if cross-device offers that promise, why haven't we done it up until now? So you may think it's to do with the technology, and I hope to persuade you a little bit later that the technology and data sets are there. It's no longer a technology or device barrier that's stopping you get there. And certainly, if I go inside the agencies, what you find is that we've got a bunch of processes and tools that we use that actually inhibit our ability to think cross-device and cross-screen. And to describe that to you a little bit more is inside an agency, you'll find an analyst. And that analyst is typically working from panel data where you've got a bunch of opt-in users, maybe some hundreds of thousands of them, who've basically agreed to have their usage monitored, who agreed to answer a questionnaire once in a while. And from that, as an analyst, you'll work out, what is your media spend that you should be doing on mobile or social or whatever. So you separate out your budgets, and then you give it to your mobile specialist or your video specialist or your social specialist or whoever. And those separate siloed media buying teams will then go do their thing. So you're already in silos. And what that means is, not quite an out-of-home experience as this kind of is showing, but what it means is that as a consumer, if I am not interested in your particular advertising message, the algorithms have to learn it on the mobile. They separately have to learn it on the desktop and wherever else that you're collecting the data. So it's a long time and a lot of over-media spend and exposure before it's learned that you're really not interested. Conversely, if you are interested, it has to learn it on mobile, it has to learn it independently on the desktop and on the smartphone. So those are the challenges that you have if you don't do cross-device. So why, if we know that, why is it not happening? And as I say, I'm going to hopefully convince you that it's not the technology or the data. Part of it is FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I don't know mobile, I don't know cross-screen, I don't know what's going on. So there's definitely an education exercise that we're still in the middle of. I think a large part of it is this siloed mentality. You know the mobile guy because he's got mobile on his business card, and he's determined to maximize the spend that's going through the mobile channel. He's not trying to optimize mobile spend as a function of outcome. And the last point, it says TV data is not digital data, but a lot of agency folk are kind of geared up to TV panel data kind of dimensions. So they're used to having a big data set on their laptop, which they'll be running queries or some BI tool on their laptop to get an insight after running it for an hour or two. If you're in the digital domain, you're using terabytes of data, and you're trying to get an insight, if not in seconds, certainly within minutes and hours, it's probably too late. So those are the things. If you're going to do this properly, you really have to make a big data investment to make that happen. So cross-device. So this is the danger is kind of speaking the obvious, but by cross-device, it really is about how do I connect Ian's smartphone to his laptop, to his tablet. So that's the set of devices that we call. The word that's missing out here is digital, because the next piece that we are working on is cross-screen. So how do we bring in TV into this dynamic? But for now, this presentation, I'll focus on cross-device. So it's really about connecting those three things to me as an individual. And this, since you're all programmatic experts, this is probably really stating the obvious, but there's basically two solutions out there. And on the newest side is the deterministic. So this is really Facebook, it is Google, and probably now Verizon with AOL and Yahoo, where you log in. You log in through multiple devices. So they have a piece of PII, which they then tie the device ID, the cookie ID, any identifier that they drop, they can tie back to your account. And that means that you don't actually have to be logged in. You only have to be logged in once for them to get that piece of information. Next time they see your device ID or a cookie, they can tie it back so they know it's exactly you. The thing that the deterministic guys don't really talk about is the fact that they don't have 100% reach. So actually, even the deterministic guys are using probabilistic techniques. The thing is, they have a lot of actual deterministic data that they can then use to train their probabilistic models. So their probabilistic models are amongst the best that you'll see. The challenge they have is because they are dealing with PII, they're limited in terms of what they can expose. So the other side, which is the probabilistic guys, they are working out it's probably you. And how they're doing that is typically when you're at home in the evening, you're all connected to your Wi-Fi through your laptop and your tablet and your smartphone. And so you've got a common IP address. So immediately they can tie all of those individuals to a household. Then a subset of those devices will turn up the next day in a different location. So that subset of devices is probably me going to work. So that group of identities is probably me. They also layer on usage data. So again, my wife's browsing habits may be different to mine. And again, they can kind of separate out users based on their clickstream history. So that's how the two things work. And on the deterministic side, in Cadreon, we're working with Google, DoubleClick, and Facebook. And on the right-hand side, we work with Tapad and Drawbridge. And we have a big data infrastructure that we've created. It's called AMP. We actually use an offline ID, which is an Experian ID. So it's effectively a credit card, hashed credit card ID. And we tie all the data that we have to that thing. We do our analysis, and then we push it to our media buying platform, again through a sync with Experian and LiveRamp. And so the segment we are interested in turns up in Tapad or Drawbridge or DBM. And at that point, we then can leverage the cross-screen capabilities of that particular platform. So the technology's there, it works, and it works well. So what are the things that we're using the approach for? So the first case that we used was cross-device measurement. As I say, agencies started out using panel data, effectively to understand how people use different devices. And now with this data set, we can get a lot more insights across a lot more users. So analysis of what people were doing is the first part. Once we've got big enough segments, we can start to use it for consistent targeting on the mobile, on social, and on display. And then the final thing is, which I think is the most important, is really this ability to extend the engagement with your consumers. So the main benefit, as I said earlier, to the consumer is if I am not interested, as soon as they've picked up that signal, they can cut the advertising to all of my devices. They don't have to learn that from device to device to device. And secondly, if I've built awareness, either in my new model of car or in a new offer I have, the next time I engage with that brand, I can take you further down the conversion funnel. So I don't have to restart the campaign depending on which device they're connecting to. So this is very, very valuable, and this is the main advantage that kind of cross-device offers you. That's the consumer benefit. On the brand side, the benefit really is increased budget efficiency. I'm wasting less money having to relearn things over different platforms. And I'm getting insights that I didn't have before. So that's the key value. Just to convince you it's working, I've got a couple of case studies here. This one is for automotive. Automotive is a big vertical for us. And this is an example where we were running both Tier 1 national campaigns. So this is about, as I say, building awareness on a particular model of car. And then a separate team was working on Tier 2, which is basically local, where you're basically trying to get the consumer to visit the showroom. That's basically the two things that you're trying to do. And what we did is leverage the Tier 1 data into the Tier 2, and then on the Tier 2, we used basically cross-device. We were actually being squeezed on budget, so we had less money to play with. But what we found is that when you left it to the algorithm, it allocated about 30% of the media spend to mobile. From the media mix modeling, it was about 15%. So it was basically telling you to spend more on mobile. What we achieved was, even with this lower budget, we got a 16% uplift in conversions and an overall reduction in cost per acquisition of 42%. So quite substantial improvement. This was for CPG. Obviously, CPGs don't typically have rich consumer websites that people go and engage with. But this conversion was actually visiting a microsite so that the consumer could find more about this particular new product that this CPG was offering. And again, the agency silo model, we had a mobile guy who was basically optimizing the mobile spend he'd been given from the media mix modeling. We had the display guy doing the same, the video guy doing the same. And what we did was brought it all together basically for a cross-screen, cross-device campaign, should I say. And the main thing was a retargeting tactic was the thing that really kind of got the conversions, as you can imagine. And this basically showed a 10-fold increase in people who were visiting the microsite. So quite an impressive change in user behavior based on that cross-device performance. So what do you need to make cross-device work? So the first three are kind of what I've talked about. So inside an agency, you need to educate and get organizational buy-in that this makes sense, because you're going to be stripping away at the silos. So that's the first thing. As part of the right process, if you're stripping away those things, you can't leave a vacancy. So you need to kind of put in the processes that make sense. And you need the right technology and data. And as I say, don't believe that it's only the deterministic solutions that work. The probabilistic solutions work pretty well too. The final thing, which I haven't talked about, is right attribution. And my frustration is about 2 years ago, the probabilistic solutions got sufficient scale to start deliver good results. And we would go in, we would get people excited, we'd run a campaign, we'd get good results. And then nothing would happen. We wouldn't get a renewal or a replacement. And this was a lot of energy just trying to get the thing restarted. So we finally found the person inside the agency who was saying, no, don't spend any more money on cross-device. And he was, again, the guy in the analytics team running the media mix modeling. And he had an attribution solution. And There was a USA Today graphic for this, but as I say, I'm a geek, so I like real data. This is actually what was coming out of his multi-touch attribution platform. And just to explain it, on the bottom axis, it is how much was spent on the particular tactic. So each of these dots is a different publisher spend, or a different ad network spend, or a programmatic shop like ours running a different tactic. So that's what each of those dots are. And on the bottom axis, you want to be getting as big a part of the spend as possible. So you want to be as far to the right as possible. And going up the left-hand side, this is the cost per attributed conversion, and it was a fractional attribution approach. So you want to be as low as possible. You want to get as much spend as possible, and you want to have cost the least per conversion that you deliver. And the good news is, some of the things that I was doing was down at the 100K level, so we were getting big spends, and we had a lot of trust with this particular client. However, that red dot was also me, and that red dot was my cross-screen. And basically what was happening was the attribution solution was picking up all of my spend, but the attribution solution was only working on single device. So what that meant was it took my total spend across all of the media and then attributed the conversion, it was mainly conversion on a desktop, from the desktop media spend, if that makes sense. So what that meant was I was effectively wasting the money that I was putting on mobile as it was hurting how it looked from that. So the message in this graph really is that when you get into this, the first question you need to be asking is, how is my performance judged? And if the analytics team aren't using cross-device attribution, you need to persuade them to do something else. So that's quite important. And many of the multi-touch attribution solutions and even the ad servers actually do now do cross-device attribution. However, if the analytics team have extracted log files and have built their algorithms on top of those log files, probably they're not running, because Facebook and Google in the log files don't expose the cross-device ID. They only expose the cookie ID or the device ID in hash form. So that's quite important as you try to convince your agency colleagues that you're doing a good job. So that's where we are today. Cross-device works. Use it. Just make sure everyone's running the right process and knows how to attribute. What we're working on next. So the first is cross-screen. So the question is, how can we bring these cross-device principles to television? Turns out with addressable TV, it's easy, but addressable TV is still limited in reach. So we're trying to now bring in linear TV, and we have got new data sets such as set-top boxes that are starting to make that a lot easier. So hopefully next year I will be telling you about cross-screen. The second thing is that inside an agency, a lot of the time we're actually optimizing to a proxy. So again, in automotive, we will optimize to somebody configuring a car or somebody registering for a test drive. What we actually want to get to is someone walking into a dealership and buying a car. And so we have data sets like Data Logics that come in to help us understand that better, but it's expensive and it's slow. So we know after the fact, so in-flight optimization is tough. As soon as you've got data from a mobile phone, you know if the guy visited the dealership or not. And as e-commerce or m-commerce takes off, you'll get more and more mobile transactions on the mobile device. So that gives you the ability to optimize towards the real goal that you have for your particular campaign. And then the final thing is that as we've learned our lesson, that we've got these media mix models at the front end of the process that then confine our media spend in a bucket. We're actually working on new tools and techniques so that we can go upstream and inform the planning process more accurately so that we can do some of these cross-device and some of these other practices. So that's what we're doing inside Cadreon. Thank you.
Ian, thank you very much. That was great stuff. We have time for some questions. You answered one of my questions about auto. So conversions were the definition of conversion on that auto campaign was build a model.
Yeah, so
build a model.
On that particular campaign, Unfortunately, the client doesn't want me to reveal their name, but they should, because it was a great campaign. But it was basically a register for a test drive. That was the conversion.
Is geo-targeting a part of that already?
Yeah. So
I know that geo is not part of the measurement, but
in terms of advertising the right moment, the right place, the right everything, mobile helps us. Internally, we call it moments marketing, and we have a lot of planning tool development that kind of goes around kind of moments marketing. And so we have multiple approaches to geo targeting. So one is specifically they are in the process of a transaction now. So there's particular, because they're on the deal a lot now. So if they're surfing at Kelley Blue Book or wherever, there's certain things that you want to be doing at that particular point in time. If they leave the dealership are they still in market? So you can then kind of recognize that they were in the dealership with their mobile, so that next time you see them on the desktop, if they're still browsing on Kelley Blue Book and others, they're still in market. So again, that can inform is it worthwhile continuing with the retargeting campaign, or should I suspend my retargeting campaign? So those are some of the signals we use for using the geolocation.
And to tease out that point that you made towards the end about performance and that mobile was throwing off your metrics, could you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of the role of mobile in all of this? Because you started out by talking about how everyone, despite Legend, everyone really is still multi-platform. And I'm curious about what you're seeing in terms of where conversions are on mobile, how mobile is fitting into the mix. Are you really seeing that in many cases, mobile is simply a part of a discovery mechanism and people are still converting more on desktop, and that's part of the process?
Yeah. So I think as I say, the key takeaway for you is if you go inside the agency, you will find a raft of people with mobile on their business card. And in that, they are really thinking through the entire user journey wholly from a kind of a mobile perspective. And as I say, through going through all the data, the key insight for us really was that the mobile is part of a journey. So the conversion for us on, say, automotive, most of the final registering for a test drive actually was on a desktop. But a lot of the discovery, if you will, was actually on the mobile during office working hours. Presumably, the guy talking to his mates in the office about which mobiles were being interesting to him. So that was the dynamic on automotive. For some of the CPGs, it was the reverse. Actually, when they were trying to find out about the product, they were probably on their mobile, probably in the store. So again, the part that mobile plays in the user journey is very brand and vertical centric, is our finding.
And I think you mentioned early on that the algorithm, in the auto example, the algorithm was recognizing and crediting mobile for having that role and still buying fairly heavily on mobile because you were seeing the results on desktop.
As I say, the challenge, the surprise to us really was, and this is not to be rude to analytics people. Inside Cadreon, we have a lot of analytics people, but they have tools that they have kind of grown up and know and love and trust, right? And for whatever reason, we're still using last click attribution because it's easy to understand, and we've been using it forever. Everyone knows it's wrong, and there's plenty of good deterministic multi-touch attribution solutions available. Similarly to cross-device, both Atlas and DoubleClick have a cross-device ID that you can basically attribute conversions to. If you go inside agency teams, you'll still find a large number of them still working off of cookie-based data because they want some historical comparison to what they saw last year or the year before. So if you're doing that, then your media buy on a cross-device, the metrics are going to look poor compared to reality. So it's that making sure everybody understands what we're looking at and we're all kind of bought into the same thing. So that's been the challenge, at least from our experience, as we've tried to adapt some of these techniques.
Ian Johnson, great, interesting stuff. Thanks very much for coming.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, obviously, this is something that's still doing it properly and getting the numbers right, as we just saw, is pretty tricky. What are companies doing now to start knitting this together, and what are our plans for investing in the future? To take up this topic, we have Paul Willey, who's the President and Chief Performance Officer at Swift. Swift is mainly on the creative side of the agency spectrum, but he oversees the performance piece, and part of his job is to look at the cutting-edge solutions that are coming across his desk and integrating them into the agency, and also oversees performance for all accounts. Please welcome Paul Willey.
Thank you, Steve, and good morning, everybody. I understand that last night's party evolved into Phil Collins karaoke last night. I'm sorry I missed that part. Well done to you Phil Collins fans. Anyway, thank you again for having me out. And before we get started on this, really reconciling cross-channel metrics and ROI, I'd like to have my panelists introduce themselves. We have a great mix of individuals here. I'll start right here to my left.
Bill Burkhart. I manage our data management practice across North America. We manage data assets across the WPP universe, everything from PII to broad-based panel data, as well as all of our Kantar Shopcom data. Secondly, we utilize that data to create insights, enabling our creative teams to actually marry content to that environment. So our task is to build, manage big data environments on behalf of our clients.
Min Cho with Cars.com, mainly on the performance marketing side. So think search engine marketing, Facebook. I don't do programmatic, so I'm kind of an outsider coming in here. I do feel like we've been talking about this for a while. I want to say I was on the panel 4 or 5 years ago on this, so I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Hi, I'm Kylie. I work at Warner Music Group in the Artist Services Division. I'm a CRM campaign manager, so I manage first-party data collection, insights, and planning for that data for Atlantic Records and a host of other labels.
Excellent. So I want to start just with a philosophical question here for our panelists. And really what I want to get at here is something that Min just talked about. We've been talking about reconciling this for 4 or 5 years, and I think the reality is that the world of advertising, the world of consumers, devices, and frankly digital as well, has diversified so fast. And the methods and channels and metrics have diversified so fast that it's getting very difficult to catch up to determining the value of a like or a share on social versus a view and a click, and understanding that consumer journey. But we know that marketers are really looking critically at how can I reconcile all these disparate data sources and data sets and determine a holistic measurement model and ROI. So I want to put it out to our panel first, though. Philosophical question for you all. Are marketers asking for the impossible here? Bill?
Well, I would say that many times our clients, rather than looking at kind of omni-channel attribution, any channel attribution. In other words, is it causing a lift in my business? Because of Wonderman's background being a kind of a direct marketer, a direct marketing agency, every client that we have comes to us because we have kind of a view of a response, and that response is not necessarily at the level of a click. It has to be a buy, a purchase, And so if you imagine from a client's perspective, they're having to manage the Lumascape in terms of vendors and vendor sets. So many times our task is to actually help them reconcile that and have a simplified method to measure a lift in campaigns, a lift in purchase across devices, but mostly am I having a lift against a control? So I think it's some this worry and constant consternation of am I getting a return for my dollar is mission critical for clients. So.
Excellent. Thanks, Bill. Min, on your side, being within inside of Cars.com, I'm curious how, just even internally at Cars.com, how you all are approaching this. Do you feel like this is something that's possible? Is this a charge within your organization? How do you feel you guys are getting after this?
Yeah, and I think we all want an easy, quick solution and check off the box and say, yes, we solved attribution and move on. But the reality of it is it's like life. It's complex. It's evolving. And, I don't know if you play fantasy football, football season's coming up. there's all these sort of data that you can look at, but you want to just look at one data, or you want to say, hey, this is going to predict what you want it to do. So, I mean, I think the conversation, to answer your question, I think it is impossible to say, yes, I'm done. But I think you need to kind of continue to have that conversation keep going. So from Cars.com point of view, we have a lot of data sets that we look at. We have sort of this one, we look at business objects. It's not perfect. We all know that, understand that. And we look at all the data that's available, but we know that it's not perfect, and we're far from that.
Sure. And even just within inside of Cars.com, you're on the DR, the paid search side of things primarily. There's other individuals internally that focus on display and other methods as well for Cars.com. I'm curious, from your side, when you have two different teams or two different individuals that are looking at attributing success to their channel, how do you reconcile who's right?
So I think that was a couple of years ago in terms of who's right and wrong, and I think that kind of conversation is not productive. And I think where we've sort of landed now is, hey, we have different ways of looking at search. We have different ways of looking at display, programmatic display, and you have attribution over here, you have last click over here. Let's just kind of agree that it's going to be somewhere in between, and that because even from a search marketer perspective, I understand and value display marketing. I just don't know if I agree with the entire attribution model, but there is clear value there. So we need to get to a middle ground, and it's a constant adjusting, and we need to kind of continue to have that conversation. But I think now it's more of a less of a are you right, am I right, but more of a okay, how can we understand this better?
Right. Kylie, on your side with Warner, I'm curious, you lead on CRM, but there's also a very strong, even though it's a lean team, a very strong team that's analyzing lots of data and trying to understand what's working and what's not. How do you approach success internally within your role and with others and managing other different channels?
So music is particularly complicated because we're trying to push people towards third-party retailers as well as ourselves, anywhere where they won't pirate music. So a lot of times I can't tell if something is converted. So attributing success to a particular marketing play is very difficult. I can see if someone clicked on something, but I don't know if they bought. I don't know if they got to iTunes and then bounced and went to Spotify. So
got it.
Yeah,
I'm curious, even just among those here in the room, when you are working either brand side, if you're working with inside of a company or working with an agency, have you found, just by a show of hands, have you seen that there is a fragmentation as far as who owns which channels? Like there may be someone who oversees social, or there may be someone that oversees. This is my pain every day, just Okay, so a number of us. So part of, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we all face is culturally within our clients' organizations. If there's not a unified approach toward why we participate in these channels and the value or the role in which they play for this brand, then you get into these big challenges of which effort do we attribute this success to? Really, why do we care about this kind of stuff? Because it drives budgeting. It drives where do dollars go. It drives how do we know what to do better next time around. And listening to Ian's talk just a moment ago was really, really encouraging for me, because when I look at platforms that can begin to look across device and across channel and look at that from a probabilistic manner, that's finally beginning to take disparate sources, disparate individuals, and bring that together in a more meaningful way. I'm curious, panelists, from your perspective, by the way, I come from the creative side of things, the non-working dollars side of things, so don't hate me for that. But I actually really like the side that we come from, because we get a chance to partner with media agencies on how can we understand the customer journey together and map that out together. Let's understand that customer journey. Let's not assume that everyone plays in a perfectly linear fashion from this device to this channel to this activity and then this conversion, but to make sure that we're ultimately understanding this together. And until media and creative agencies can align, we end up telling different stories of success and what worked. Bill, I'm curious from your perspective, the role of creative agencies or social agencies, how is that benefiting or challenging the work that you guys are facing daily?
I was just going to ask you, Paul, in your example, one of the kind of gaps that we find that we have between our creative teams and our media and deployment teams is, that if you differentiate the content, you know that you're ultimately going to have a lift in response because you test. But it's a dramatically different environment for creative teams in terms of their background and their training and their learning. Because now you're saying, wait, you're saying you're going to give me kind of this template environment, and I have to work within the construct of that template. That's not how I was trained.
Right.
The point is, more content is better than less content. More personalized content is better than less personalized content. And our task is to actually enable the creative teams to realize that they ultimately have creativity available to them. It's just somewhat within a given canvas. The canvas can be large, but there is a canvas. It's not infinite in terms of their thinking. Right. And I think that bridge has yet to be fully crossed, and people are kind of still meeting in the middle. It's been a long time, but they're still meeting in the middle. I know all of your examples in terms of your efforts, you always will find that differentiated content works better than one size fits all. It's like, duh, right? But it's a different measure to actually get it moving, get it implemented.
Absolutely. Kylie, at Warner, are there internal creative teams or creative agencies that work with you on the actual content creation by channel?
So content creation by channel, each label has a certain set of creatives for the most part. So yeah.
Great. And how do you inform their work today? Is that something where you're providing insights up front? Is it something that measurement on the back end is what informs future activities? How does your role and your team's role inform creative teams at the labels?
Basically, if we want to perform a test, we go back to them and ask them to create a second set of creative. They're usually pretty willing. I think sometimes they don't want to bend to exactly what we're asking. If the copy needs to be phrased or structured a certain way based on the call to action, that is sometimes a conversation. But for the most part, I think people really want to make more money, so they're willing to do that.
Absolutely.
Paul, one thing I want to mention on the issue of social. So, many times clients have a social group of some kind, but generally their focus is social as community, social as driving conversations, not social as a as a marketing channel, not social as a response generating thing. Mm-hmm. And our focus is that yes, there can be a community, there can be a conversation, but ultimately social can be a direct marketing channel that should be viewed like any other direct marketing channel.
Absolutely.
And I'd say that's kind of at a point of contention now many times, because the social community guys and the client's like, no, that's not a response generating vehicle, and the client's going, wait, it is, and it's like it's kind of a battle that we find many times happening.
Absolutely. Min, with Cars.com, I'm curious what role social plays and the perspective internally at your organization.
Yeah, going back to your first question, so we do use agencies for our overarching kind of creative and brand messaging, and we also have designers in-house. So my team is more on the direct response side, but we do also work with other teams that's more on the creative and more sort of branding, if you will. So my team handles the direct response part of Facebook and social, and we've been very successful with it, and it is a direct response medium. There is a social community component, and we're starting to ramp that up a little bit, but the hard metrics aren't there with that, so that's been a little bit slower kind of ramping up. So so I think, in terms of creative and UX and design, how do you influence that? And a lot of it is depending on what's your campaign going to be.
Right.
Is it going to be direct response? But we do communicate quite a bit, just even from a search engine marketing perspective, like, hey, this ad copy, so for example, search 4.1 million cars on Cars.com works really well on our branded terms, so that's going to help inform some of the display creative and copy. So there's kind of a back and forth, and they help us with kind of like, hey, make sure you use this kind of language to reinforce a positivity to the brand. But we have like an overarching kind of integrated.
Musical artists, I would imagine that's even more diverse as far as the role that social plays in awareness driving, in driving sales, and in just frankly a fandom around different artists and for different labels. I'm curious, Kylie, from your perspective at Warner, how is it that you have ultimately measured or analyzed the role of social by genre or even by artist?
Whoa. So social is different for every artist. It also depends if an artist has gone dark or wants to be on social, so that plays a huge thing.
Phil Collins?
Yeah, I was just going to.
Yeah. Yeah. Phil Collins versus Wiz Khalifa. So there's like that piece of figuring out how much an artist is actually willing to do on their social that is for, in fact, e-commerce or pushing the DSPs. And it depends on how engaged the audience is. So I'm sort of skirting it, sorry. But it really depends on like the historical results that we've had. And then we use whatever socials we can. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I think really what we're getting at here is there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to the role of social or really, frankly, any of these channels, right? Bill, to your point, I think looking at social as only community is really selling social short. We know that even just from a content publishing perspective, 2% or less of organic content is actually getting seen by that followership audience on, let's say, Facebook. And the way that we look at it, even at Swift, is that you got to pay to play in the world of social. That doesn't mean that you don't have an opportunity for dialogue or conversation, and that can and should be measured as well. There's a value, an inherent return that you get from those sorts of conversations, but you can't look at it singularly as just a community driver. At least that's our perspective as well. I'm curious, panelists, Min, let's start with you actually. Over the past 12 months, what's been one of the greatest disruptions in determining ROI across channels for Cars.com?
Greatest disruption for calculating ROI. I think we're talking about it. Cross-device is a disruption. I'm not sure we've figured that out yet. We are measuring conversions with the cookie. So once you hand it off to a device, then you kind of lose that. Yeah. Maybe I need more time to think about that.
We'll bring it back next year. Kylie, on your side, major disruption in determining ROI or challenges that you faced really over the past 12 months, anything that's really stood out for you?
So the consumption model has obviously changed in music. So understanding the user behavior once they leave our ecosystem and go to a different platform or really anywhere else where they're doing music discovery, understanding what that discovery process looks like now that the consumption model is so different is difficult. And so, yeah, I think that's probably the biggest disruption.
With music streaming platforms around consumption behaviors, is that information that they share back with labels today, or is that's really their secret sauce right now? Are they willing to share much around behaviors on those platforms?
They do not. So for the most part, what we get back is anonymized data about what's been listened to, but we can't tie that back to a user. We get very large data sets and we can see, user X listened to that song 20 times and user Y listened to it once, so user X must be a super fan, but we have no way of actually addressing user X unless it's directly through that platform.
Got it.
Yeah, it's their proprietary data. There is third-party data, which if someone opts in to hear from a third party, they get our stuff, which I encourage you all to do. But yeah.
Great, Bill.
Because we're in a situation for our clients of actually maintaining their first-party data, all their customer data, all their transaction data. If there's any prospect data, we're managing that on their behalf. The recognition that for every business, there's a kind of a pipeline. There's an initial interaction, there's a next level interaction, and next level, and finally there's a purchase. having the data set to allow you to do that measurement throughout that pipeline, the recognition that there's value in each slice of that pipeline, and how to move it from one level to the next level of the pipeline, that it's a connected story. It's not a separate story of managing customers. So this kind of CRM, customer relationship management. Well, then you have your lead generation activity.
Right, yeah.
No, it's one. And our view is kind of a interesting analogy, which is every prospect you have is a customer just hasn't bought yet, right? So think about it that way and manage that pipeline, and the recognition that it's a connected story, and having the data to allow you to have that and measure that connected story through to purchase.
Great. I'm curious, Bill, because your role, even within Wonderman, you get a chance to see a lot of different industries, a lot of different companies and brands. I'm curious if there are industries or brands that you feel are on the forefront of innovation in the cross-channel metrics reconciliation world, from your perspective.
Yeah, automotive, is probably, I would say, on the leading edge, because just the dollars at stake are so dramatic, given the purchase price. In terms of laggard, I'd say probably either financial services or in some cases CPG, just because of the absence of data.
Right.
And we happen to have a benefit in that having the Kantar Shopcom data at our able to be used based on client activity, we can actually see consumer spend. And allow us to target audiences on that basis and see spend. That helps. It's not the complete story,
right?
But it certainly helps. So I see automotive on the leading edge, and probably CPG on the lagging edge.
Interesting. Kylie, on your side, I'm curious, do you feel like music is one that has had to innovate quickly in this world of understanding where to put dollars and reconcile what's working? Do you feel like music falls on that leading edge or somewhere in the middle or elsewhere as far as really making sense of these different channels and metrics?
I would say we're definitely not on the leading edge. For the past 10 years, I think music's been very reactive. So to become proactive, that was a hurdle. And now sort of we're looking at consumer behavior and trying to understand that, and then place dollars. But I don't think we really understand where to put money and what we're getting back, actually.
Interesting. Min, from your perspective.
It's interesting, automotive as a leading edge. And, I've been in automotive for, 17 years. So I guess it's hard for me to say. But, I guess if I do kind of think back, we've been looking at attribution for a long time. We've been working with Visual IQ for, I think, over 4 years. And and even within Google and Google Analytics, there's attribution models, and just kind of looking at that. And I guess in that sense that we have been thinking about it for a while, and it's been a problem that we've been trying to solve and get better at. And I know OEMs and our OEM partners are on top of that as well. And I know there's a lot of dollars behind it, but I'm not sure our OEM friends have figured that out either. So I think one thing is maybe where does retail kind of e-tail? Are they ahead of the curve because their transactions are a little bit more measurable? I'm not sure if you guys have any thoughts on e-tail.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that e-commerce is generally this concept of cross device is super important for the e-tailer. Yeah. Certainly when there's not a store involved. Where there's a store and e-commerce, it's tough. Just because you have kind of cross their channel, they've got the store channel and the e-commerce channel, so they have channel attribution drama that unfolds. But the simply e-commerce driven, I probably would say that they're leading, a leading edge, in terms of attribution, because they can.
Right. Yeah, one thing that came up in our panel discussion was, so at Cars.com, there's a different side of attribution. So our main customers are our dealer customers. They put our inventory on our site, And the way we define value is, hey, we gave you this many email leads or this many phone calls, so therefore we're worth this much. So what about the consumers who are on cars, don't do any of that, and they actually just end up going to the dealership? So one of the things that we just recently launched was using beacon technology to say, hey, Mr. Dealer, although we only referred 10 emails and 10 phone, you actually got 30 walk-ins that didn't do any of that. So in a different way, not from a marketing point of view, but from an attribution point of view, we're kind of doing that. And I think the next step is, can we leverage some of that data to inform our marketing? But we're kind of starting that in that beginning part of the journey with that.
I think that's really fascinating. I know we're coming up on time. I think there's a couple of big themes that I've heard here. One is certainly one size does not fit all. The other is, what are we trying to do? We're trying to get after people. And people are going to move around different channels, different devices. That is a complex, dynamic world that we live in. That's not going to slow down at all. And so the reality is we all have to adapt. Ian was just sharing that in the previous session as well, but I think that's something that all of us face today. One thing that we certainly believe at Swift, and I think is probably held not just across this panel, but within this room, is the more we can know our consumer and the more we can understand their motivators, the better we can craft better messages at the right time. And I've loved hearing that day over day over day, is to intersect with that consumer at the right place, at the right time, with the right message to really make meaning. I've heard a study that individuals are exposed to as much as 4,000 brand messages a day. How do you break out from the noise from that? And that's a big challenge. But I think making sure that ultimately we are trying to reach people. And how can we do that most effectively, and then begin to attribute value to that message at that right time by channel. I want to keep an eye out for time here. Steve?
We need to let's go to let's go to questions. Right here.
Matt Havas. Question for you guys just on the attribution that you're doing. Are you looking at the incremental attribution and so trying to get at just what's the difference or the full credit attribution?
Great. Kylie, do you want to start with that?
No.
Okay.
Yes.
No. I'll take from our perspective, the first measure of response is, again, some kind of control. So all spend versus audiences that don't receive spend. So first of all, look at the incremental shift in terms of total spend. Then within the responder categories, then we look at a channel attribution in terms of what's the incremental lift, be a modeling. Not last click or last whatever. It's essentially a modeling approach. Is there incremental gain to the addition of that channel and that spend, and second channel and third channel and fourth channel? But you only do that after you've deconstructed. Is there incrementality against a control of an audience that's not been reached with the message? But I would say within that, is there incrementality within the channel attribution? Not so much. But overall, against that control of an audience not receiving stimulus.
Good. Other questions?
I wanted to follow up with both of our marketers about the sales piece. And Min, you mentioned using beacon technology at the dealer level. First of all, where are you getting that? And are you also using other types of geo-targeting or geo-measurement to match, exposures to, walk-ins, because there's this whole new data layer that's using mobile to tie together ad impressions with actual physical.
Yeah, I might have misspoke on the beacon technology, but we're somehow identifying that the consumer is near a dealership. So we have all the dealership locations uploaded with the partner of ours. And I can give you that partner name afterwards. But basically, we can tell whether, we have consumers who are on cars.com across the street at a Burger King and doing some research before actually heading into the dealership. So right now, we're just using it to demonstrate the value of cars.com to our dealer customer. I'm hoping that the next step is we'll be able to use that data to inform our marketing and do a little bit more on that side.
And Keely, I know you don't have physical stores as much to worry about, but I'm curious about, or maybe you do, but I'm curious about your relationship with a lot of the digital music sales outlets like a Spotify or Apple. Are they just not giving you the data you need to really tie together your marketing with sales impact?
So we do get sales information, and we know how much we made from iTunes in a given day, and obviously we get paid based on the number of streams by Spotify, and also we do get anonymized data of those streams. So we do get that information. I think it's just hard to tie it together on a one-to-one level. So identifying that was in fact the user who clicked on the link on a YouTube iTunes ad, that's very weird, and then bought the song. I think that tying those two pieces together is our biggest challenge, and that's where we're running into some issues, because we don't get all of the data we would like. I don't know that anyone does, but so yeah.
Was there another? I'm sorry. Was there another one? I'm missing.
This question's for Bill. I know you. I'm Latanya Hodges, Redbox. This question for Bill. You have stated that social has been a generating channel, and I was wondering what attributions do you look at when you think about social?
Yeah, simple. In terms of doing matchback algorithms, identifying that in fact messaging, differentiated messaging in a Facebook newsfeed creates a lead, a response, some kind of interaction being created by that. So thinking about the Facebook newsfeed literally as I'm going to say it's like an email. It's not, but it has more territory for messaging and the ability of having differentiated messaging. There's drama in terms of matching and tracking and so forth, as you might imagine with Facebook. But we've figured out a way in which we can engage with Facebook to do that in a disguised way and measure incrementality and lift.
Sometimes too, and we've had to do this a little more on the quick and dirty side, is with a mobile phone manufacturer that we work with. They wanted to understand what value is social in driving actual sales. And as a mobile phone manufacturer, it's amazing how little data you get from sales through carriers. You might know the sales in total, but to get down to some of that granular data, it's actually just not there. They don't actually share that. So we've done things as simple as let's do some tests. Let's do some value proposition messaging through social only for the launch of a phone, and then do a post-purchase survey outside of stores for a period of time to understand why did you choose this phone, and to find out what percentage of sales were driven by that value proposition. That was a fascinating study for us. We found that for what we thought would be around 10-15% was actually closer to 40% reason as to why someone chose that device was because of messaging they saw just within social alone. So sometimes it's just test and learn, right? And I think that's been something else that's been really important, that no matter what, no matter when, test and learn is something that has to be part of our everyday.
Paul and panel, thanks very much. We are going to extend this into the roundtable discussion that Paul is going to lead after our next panel. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
And let me ask Natalie and our... But this is where we extend outward and end the event by looking at how programmatic is extending onto a bunch of new platforms. And also, one of the things that I noticed is I've covered programmatic as we start seeing it move into TV, into audio now, which is, I think, an especially important channel that has been undervalued for a long time, but also out of home, and then, of course, ultimately into Internet of Things, is how the very definition of programmatic starts morphing, especially if you talk to anybody on the programmatic TV channel. The definition of programmatic, in fact, is so wild. We're starting our TV summit with that very question: what the hell is programmatic TV anyway? But to take up this question of how is programmatic, how are these techniques of both ad tech and the techniques of media buying starting to extend into a lot of other post-web, post-online channels? We have Natalie Cecil, who's the director of brand media and strategy, taking lead from PMG. PMG is an agency based in Fort Worth. She's worked with brands like Apple on their Beats by Dre campaign, but also J. Crew, Nike, and Estee Lauder. Please welcome Natalie and her panel.
Thanks, Steve. Let me preface this conversation with that you guys might hear me say y'all a few times throughout the panel. I've just been in Texas for 12 years, and it's clearly taken its toll. So apologies in advance if you guys hear me say y'all. So before we get started, I wanted to have Ashley, Matt, and Eric do a round of introductions, kind of noting their current role and what they are looking to bring to today's conversation.
Sure, I'm Ashley Evenson. I'm the Director of Digital Media at Cadreon. I really specialize in the programmatic landscape. I actually service both advertisers and brands as well as publishers.
I'm Mac Laser at Palisades Media Group. We're an independent media agency down in Santa Monica, the beautiful beaches down there. Come and visit sometime. I focus primarily on our data activation and management, and then managing a number of clients in the non-entertainment space and DR space.
And I'm Eric Perko. I'm the head of the media capability at Matejzik-Hofer. That's how you pronounce our agency name. We are a creatively led agency in San Francisco, so we do everything on the media side, from broadcast TV buying to outdoor to social to digital. So programmatic is typically a piece of our plans, but we're always looking to push the envelope into something new.
Great, thank you guys. So for the audience, I know you guys might be checking the status of your flight, what time your car is going to get here, but didn't want to have you guys off the hook just yet. Wanted to throw out a few poll questions for you all. How many in the room have utilized programmatic executions to support traditional media? Just a few hands. Okay, that's what I figured would happen. And then how many in the room believe that programmatic executions are viable today for traditional forms of media? Okay, there we go. So honestly, they've saved the best content for last. We've heard a lot of great content over the course of the last few days, but we're gonna lean on Ashley, Matt, and Evan Eric, sorry, for having experience both on the traditional side and programmatic side, to lean on them from their experience and expertise to really kind of help us understand how the two worlds are starting to actually collide. So in preparing for today's panel, we discussed a few weeks back some general categories and themes for our discussion today. So we hope to cover off on the general shift in connectivity, how traditional is starting to actually become impacted by digital means, and then how we can leverage programmatic buying and those solutions to help accommodate buying traditional advertising. So to kick things off, you guys, what does TV or traditional actually mean in today's world, knowing that marketing vehicles are essentially everywhere, cross-screen, digital billboards, elevator banks? How are we actually really starting to define traditional, or does that word start to dissipate?
Yeah, I don't place a ton of importance on the definitions. I think it's more like touch points of where people are. So, but if I was forced to put a definition around traditional, I think it's people buying things in this sort of traditional way of reserved inventory and buying things out based on a schedule. So if we're talking about TV, you're talking about like network TV. That's how I would assume traditional, or static outdoor is like a traditional method in my mind.
Yeah, it really has become a blended definition because it's following a consumer action rather than, what's the channel that you're watching the latest show on prime time. You very well might be watching it on NBC.com or Hulu, or you're actually tuning in at that time or via DVR. So we need to follow the consumer where they are rather than putting labels on, that particular action.
And I think, too, to kind of go off of what they're going is, I think those traditional programmatic digital, I think where that's being siloed is really at the brand or agency level. So we really need to break down those silos and stop referring to it as traditional digital. We really need to merge the worlds together.
So breaking down those silos, have you seen your clients' media strategies start to shift, or better yet, can you speak to the benefits and values of having a different mix in your experience with that?
I guess I'll first start. As being a digital agency, I think it's a struggle on, again, how do I get those large TV dollars to purchase, addressable TV? Really giving attribution to that. So it's, do I work with our brand to work with their traditional agency to try to get those budgets? in addition to, I think, not only being a purely digital agency, I think larger agencies that are full service are going to go through the same struggle as well, because I think those budgets are siloed. And whether or not, and they'll probably add to this, is who owns that? And does the TV team own that? Do they need to be trained? But, we really just need to merge all of the worlds together.
Yeah, from our side, it's really which team offers the best value for the client. It might be that via upfronts we can get a better deal on that digital video than we could via the digital team. So it's really about the moment the client gives us the brief, sitting down as a holistic team and discussing those things together to find out where the value is best suited.
Yeah, at Mateza Coffer, I think it's one of the reasons why I left. I was at Digitas before, a digital agency, and came to like a fully integrated shop where you can kind of sit above everything. Granted, we're a smaller agency, we're a boutique agency, but we're working on big brand problems. We have like banking clients, and we can kind of, from an agnostic point of view, allocate money towards TV or towards digital or towards out of home. But I do think at like much bigger shops, I mean, that's one of the things that is driving decisions is based on silos and, what people are in charge of, and budgeting based on attribution, like one of the previous panels were talking about. So it's certainly still an industry issue that is a dynamic that I think people are trying to correct.
So Matt, picking up on your point, as digital marketers, do you see yourself being challenged when you're coming together, coming to the table with those traditional agencies, creative agencies, or out-of-home agencies, and being either complementary to the discussions or causing a little bit of disruption, knowing that you're on the digital side trying to Ashley's point, maybe take some of those TV dollars?
Yeah, I think what's fortunate at Palisades is a lot of us have actually come from the traditional side and moved to digital, so we have a really good understanding of what goes on the other side of the table that offers a lot more value, to our clients. But ultimately, it has to be, a we conversation versus us versus them, because that's when, people get a little bit more territorial, and, ultimately it doesn't give the best value for, our clients' budgets.
I totally agree. I mean, I think that sometimes people forget like what we're trying to do here, and you're trying to like reach a consumer and convince them of a product and why they should purchase. And to a consumer, it's all one thing. Like they're not thinking of things in different buckets. Even though we have our different assignments, I think we sometimes get buried in that idea. Like I'm in charge of traditional or I'm in charge of digital, and I'm focusing just on that. I'm going to fight for what's best. But like to a consumer, it's all one message.
And to that point of me thinking, like, how do we, combat this? It's cross-training, really having internal seminars, and really what is the end goal is really to reach, the consumer, delivering relevant ads to relevant users. And, as an industry, I think we need to have those internal discussions as an agency as well as our brands as well. Make sure that it's an educational mix.
I agree. So tackling the budget topic, if traditional budgets are in fact shifting, how are you tackling all of those core planning pieces that would go into a traditional buy? Is it more of a general education discussion, or are you exploring the vast amount of opportunity that comes with buying traditional programmatically and noting strategies around day parting, pod sets, et cetera?
I guess I'll start with this. From working at, a digital agency, I think really if we want this kind of merging is obviously traditional is bought on a different metric, GRPs, TRPs. So when is the day that we're going to have GRPs converted into impression? When is that going to be the standardized measurement?
Yeah, and to that point, I think also, we want to be in that space, start exploring it, making sure that our clients are at the forefront of it, but, scale still limits a lot of those discussions about how much budget can go there. But if we don't start reacting now, we'll be behind the, 8 ball at that point, yeah.
Yeah, I think it should be rooted in the audience you're trying to reach and where can you best reach them and have the best resonance with them. But I do think like a universal language, like Ashley was saying, is what really opens things up. I mean, when I was running Taco Bell in a previous life at a previous agency, converting everything to TRPs and GRPs is what really allowed budget to flow from TV to digital video, because it could all be laddered up in the same report. That then, there's really old models that like need to be reported back to franchisees in that case, that you're not going to be able to break all that within a year just because it's the right place to reach the audience. So, having everything be streamlined and universal is what will help budgets flow in the right way.
So just continuing on like TV and your point on GRPs versus impressions, how does programmatic TV, or we know that programmatic TV or addressable TV enables us to buy on shorter notice, target to different households, be more refined in the audiences that we're going after. What are those efficiencies and measures for reporting so that we can actually be as granular with those traditional like TV buys from a digital perspective?
I mean, I don't think we're fully there yet. And I was talking with my CEO who's sitting over there earlier about this subject. And, we were kind of hypothesizing where the industry is going to go and those deep metrics. Obviously, for TV spots is, promo codes and certain things like that is, I think maybe the big shift will happen when TV is interactive, almost as in some of the, the V-paid inventory on YouTube, where sometimes at the end of the video you can interact, like take a survey or anything like that. So I think once TV can be very measurable and interactive, whether it's an offer on TV, then it can somehow be sent to your mobile device. I think that's when the big shift is going to happen, and we can apply attribution on a digital standpoint.
So would you say connected TVs are taking that first step, just knowing that the pod's there, it's somewhat measurable and it's targeted?
Yeah, so I definitely think the connected TVs, the Rukas, Sambas, that's definitely the first step. Obviously, we can give attribution to certain metrics on that. But I think for like the big terrestrial like TV, for that shift to happen, I think it's going to be something massive like that.
Yeah, I think to that point, the technology is there. Like we talked about yesterday, the tools are at our disposal. We have to figure out how to use them. But you think about Vizio TVs. They already have the technology to see what is on the screen and report it back through Inscape data services. There's a legal firewall there, though, to hold us back from the attribution of did they go into a store and did a beacon fire, and you tie it back through some sort of data management platform. So once we are able to get over that wall of what the lawyers allow us to do, might open up a lot of opportunity for us.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think at even just like a more basic level too, there's a lot of opportunity to test these new methods like addressable TV. I think there's a ton of promise there, but the success metric will vary wildly by client, obviously. So like our banking client, it's application loan starts, and we've been testing TV and we see like a strong uptick. So aside from having a really robust and complex attribution model, you can test these new things and see if they're working compared to days when you have a traditional schedule.
So when talking about testing, let's also kind of note the scale opportunity. Do you feel that scale is an issue with programmatic offerings for traditional media?
So recently I partook in a beta test for programmatic audio through Spotify. Obviously, that's the only channel that I can buy through a DSP right now is Spotify, but I think others, I know I've heard of Pandora going to be following suit soon. So yeah, definitely scale on what I did for audio. It's, how is it available to the mass on a publisher standpoint? I think in the aspect just on an audio standpoint, it's really hard for an integration standpoint. Google isn't DAS compliant yet, both on the publisher side and advertiser side, so that's inhibiting advertisers right now for tracking and attribution, as well as on the publisher side, they can't serve a DAS, so it's custom integration, so there's definitely a scalable issue there. And then just a little bit about that too is, he talked about A/B testing is, so for digital audio, doing a companion banner like, here, listen, this is the spot, click our banner. It's nice to be able to now A/B test maybe a spot that has a promo code versus then clicking the banner to see, what is the best performing metric.
Yeah, from an inventory standpoint, TV is going to be the biggest challenge at the moment because there isn't a lot of incentive to release inventory in that when there's a strong upfront or, the scatter market right now. This fall is really, selling well. So why release into this space when you might be able to do better outside of it? To the audio standpoint, I think there's also the challenge of going into a space with enough scale that you can data match to your, internal data systems. We're working on doing something with one of our clients right now with Pandora via the Crux link. And unless you go in with a massive database from your side and go into a large space on the other side, you're not going to have a lot of match and ultimately scale that you can deliver on.
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys said. I mean, a lot of media companies, I think, were incentivized to release inventory under programmatic because they weren't selling it through other methods. And we're probably reaching the cap of that where they're going to protect a lot of the inventory that they're making a premium on. So certainly in TV, I think we're a long way away from any of that really premium primetime inventory being available programmatically. Certainly in outdoor too, like Matt mentioned in one of our pre-chats, like, not only is the inventory a restriction, but there's also like laws around these things. Like if you're going to buy it programmatically in LA, like you were talking about, the city council has outlawed digital advertising through outdoor in many ways. So we could be reaching a place where we're getting to a plateau of what's going to be available programmatically outside of like what's already available via testing.
And to go on that point of, I think, with just talking about the history of it, display started off with all these publishers, it was unsold inventory, and I know 2015 was coined the year of programmatic, and I think that's when publishers really start taking notice, and then heading bidding came out, so that was a great solution for them to drive more revenue. So, I mean, we could still be years away. I mean, that was 2015, and essentially programmatic came out 2007, 2008, so that was quite a long lag time for it to be really taken seriously on a display standpoint. So, I mean, we could still be another 5 to 8 years away from these traditional means of publishers opening up the inventory through programmatic means.
So if there's such a lag, do we see maybe local entities profiting from this more? Speak to your experience like with Spotify and radio stations and maybe local radio stations.
Yeah, so I definitely think local advertisers, I used to work with a lot of local advertisers, so a lot of them go direct, not familiar with or have the expertise in the programmatic space. I know there are digital agencies out there that go and work with local advertisers, starting to introduce them to audience extension programs rather than going to a local publication paying a very direct and higher CPM. So I know that they're starting to get into the area. I think on audio standpoint, that's where a lot of audio dollars is with local advertisers on the local station. So I think there is a huge opportunity for local advertisers to hit their audiences once the scale is there. But another issue with local advertisers is you're going to need to have direct sales within all the markets and doing the education and things of that sort. They're not plugging into a DSP.
Yeah, there's definitely a knowledge gap between that local advertiser and what actually can occur in programmatic. Luckily, a lot of the local stations are part of a larger holding group, so I think there's actually a means to do it. The independent stations might be a long ways off, but until those local advertisers really ask for it, there isn't incentive again for them to potentially sell programmatically instead of selling direct at a premium.
So kind of drawing from this morning in cross-device, is there a cross-device play in buying programmatically for traditional means? Are the cross-device players such as Drawbridge or TapAd injecting themselves or not injecting themselves into this conversation?
I think that there certainly is, especially at like a local level when budgets are constrained. Like I was actually reading about a Cadreon example that won an Isaac Award, so kudos Ian and your team. But it was in Mexico City where it was marketing the Dodge 700, a pickup truck, and they like geo-fenced like local supply areas where people would go buy like lumber and tools and stuff, and served video and mobile display, but also bought programmatically through outdoor. And it drove sales way up. So I think that like an example of that where you're doing it for multi-channel is really amazing, but how you scale that to say like across the United States I think is pretty difficult because there's so many variables city by city. But there's certainly like down the road a huge opportunity.
Yeah, and to our front, one of our clients is Vizio, which we're very fortunate to have that data from all those Vizio TVs that are sucking data. So if you own one, by the way, everything that's on your screen can get viewed by Vizio, with some legal protections, obviously. But what we're able to do is then IP target to any other devices in that household, and we saw a huge lift in performance, ultimate sales, and engagement when we tied that second channel in with the TV buy that was already existing.
Great. So as digital marketers, how do we move towards a centralized approach? Leveraging technology to continue traditional means, but support digital, knowing that there is this level of enhancement and insight that we can glean from it.
Yeah, I think to kind of go on the conversation from yesterday on really centralizing your strategy into a DSP. I know there's DSPs coming out with more a full channel approach where you can target everything in one DSP rather than going to this channel and this channel and this channel. Is centralizing that, but knowing the strengths of everything that you're working with. So really having a repository of all of your data and strategies in one area is where I think we can go from there.
Do you have any firsthand examples of kind of just preferred experience?
Yeah, I definitely have a client that is really awareness driven. So I know a lot of people in the industry are more direct response, but I have a very awareness-driven client. So I've used programmatic native, programmatic audio, and different channels like that to really create awareness and giving that a test to see how I do before working with our direct response clients to see on what the gap is.
For those of you that have more brand awareness focused clients, are you having larger conversations about addressable TV? I know TubeMogul is pushing that at a relatively fast pace, just from our agency's perspective, but curious if addressable TV is at the forefront of the conversation with your guys' clients.
Yeah, and definitely with that same client it's been definitely discussed about, and it's whether, kind of going back to the earlier conversation, is do I pull that budget from the rest of my digital spend, or am I able to get some of the budget they have set away for TV? So that's where the conversations have been started.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about it, and have tested it this year and have seen some really positive results. It has come from the TV bucket in our case, so. But I think everyone's been talking about addressable for a long time, and it seems like this year, the last 2 years, is where it really finally opened up, and there was a real opportunity there. So so far it's been pretty good.
Yeah, exactly the same. We were having some clients going this year. Definitely, we see that scaling up next year, especially as we look for opportunities via TubeMogul, where we can start taking our first-party data from our clients' DMP. So this becomes one of the spokes from that hub, and treating this as part of a larger holistic discussion.
Great. So then kind of a few fun questions to help close out our discussion. What are some examples of the most innovative use of programmatic you've seen for traditional media channels?
So currently, as mentioned earlier in my intro, so I do work with publishers. I am working with a Minneapolis startup called Vugo, and what they are is entertainment within ride shares like Uber and Lyft. So they are a tablet in the back of the headrest that supplies content and other entertainment features. So I've been working with, so what they're kind of considered is out of home. So they have trip intent technology, so they know where you are going. Say you're coming from a yoga class, you're going home, maybe you deliver a Whole Foods ad, because obviously you can assume a yogi would like Whole Foods. So that's kind of something fun. That's been a fun project of mine to really kind of work in the out-of-home space with using technology.
Yeah, I think to that point, also the best use of programmatic is when you don't even realize that it is programmatic, where it's just relevant to you and it resonates. One of the things we're doing with one of our clients, Prezi, and if you don't know Prezi, it's basically PowerPoint on steroids via a cloud-based solution. We actually have a really robust data set in the Crux platform, and now that Pandora has invested, a lot in this space, we're actually connecting through that Crux link to do client retention, because we see a lot of one-seat license sold, and how do we create this evangelism and really speak to them in different ways? So we'll actually eventually be doing programmatic audio, utilizing first-party data deterministically in the platform. So for me, the value is how do we activate the data?
I really liked the recent example, the Cadreon example for Dodge. And then one of my favorites that I managed in the past was when we were trying to market a B2B tech client, and we actually use this technology to scrub the video content, and it like visually takes in like everything that's happening in the video. And we were trying to target any video that had the CEO from our competitor in it. And so we bought that inventory programmatically against competition CEO videos. So that was fun.
I'm sure there were a few laughs out of that.
They were happy about it.
What would you love to see scaled most out of a programmatic offering?
I definitely think TV and then audio for second.
Yeah, exactly the same. I think audio is probably something that has the most growth potential right now, and look forward to digging into that more.
I think audio would be amazing. I think I don't know if we'll ever get there, but the outdoor space would be really amazing to see and get to somewhere down the road, like Minority Report, where the messages can be served to you specifically. Everything is just still so static, but even outside of going that far, like things that can be tailored to commuter hours, there's a lot of opportunity there that we are currently held back on.
And I think too, with audio, where we could really have some fun, for me at least, is so obviously with pre-rolls, it's expensive to produce those spots. So with layering large data, it's fairly inexpensive to have an audio spot. So I would like to see almost dynamic audio someday, delivering different tailored messages to certain audiences. And I think we can definitely do that with audio due to the cost of producing audio spots.
Yeah, that would be really awesome, especially if you're, an on-the-go type person and in and out of like gyms or work or so on and so forth. That would be great. Steve?
Yeah, we have time for questions.
I have a question for Matt. So with your Visio client collecting all the data that they have, I don't even know if this is a valid question or not, but I'm going to ask it anyways. How does that data compare to the traditional metrics of Nielsen in terms of the gross rating points, and how does that compare? And then a second follow-up to that is, how does that Visio data compare to some of the programmatic data that we see kind of just broadly on the internet?
Yeah, I think the way to think about this is right now it's activation data. Like, how do you activate it for other media rather than how do you use it as attribution for something else? I think, hopefully they have the vision for that, because I think there's a lot of value as a measurement tool, but they're not there, and I think there's some legal hurdles that they have in that standpoint. When you think about, though, is the value of that data and the size of their panel is quite robust, so I think there's a lot of opportunity to model that, to expand it against other data sets that happen to already be available. So I think there's a lot of opportunity over the next couple of years. And to that point, Visio recently sold their TV division, but they held on to the data division, so it shows where they believe the value is moving forward, and that's data.
I wanted to ask, could I ask? Oh, go ahead.
I can just chime into it to your point about the panel size. The Visio footprint in the United States is about 10 million people in comparison to the Nielsen panel, which is about 100,000. So when you look at those side by side, it's obviously an enormous data set, and perhaps a bigger and better one to use for targeting purposes, et cetera.
Visio has a real challenge with the MVNOs, right? Because they're going to be able to preempt data that that set-top boxes and the cable and SAT providers can offer, right?
Yeah, because it comes straight. It measures what is physically on the TV.
On the screen, right?
So what's great about that, and there's obviously limitations in a lot of the apps and what they actually can collect. But think of it this way: as anything Hulu, Netflix that shows up on that screen, right, they actually have visibility into that. They just haven't encoded it at this point.
Samsung is in that position, right? Don't they have? They have a network running across their TV devices.
I'm not as familiar with that one. I do know that they do collect that, and I think all these manufacturers are having some legal hurdles to really scale this further.
Could I ask those of you who've worked in the audio channel, what's the state of that inventory? Are we talking mainly the emergence of podcasting, internet radio? What's the available inventory, and what are the opportunities that you see there specifically against content?
Yeah, sure. So right now, through a DSP, it's just Spotify right now. I know there are talks of Pandora going to open up some inventory as well as trying digital, but through a DSP right now, it's just Spotify.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to that point, with Pandora, you can buy a lot of things programmatically, but audio's still not there quite yet. So it's a direct, I/O at this point to activate via a DMP. But it's going that direction. I'm sure the Pandora guys can talk to it more.
How about podcasting? Which is starting to network. We're starting to see it network.
Yeah, I hope podcasts actually don't go to that place, because I think what makes it special is actually that host-read spot that naturally fits into the podcast itself. Obviously, dynamic creative insertion is wonderful in the sense that if you have a movie that's releasing this weekend, you can change the messaging up to the point that it releases, but you lose what made that space so special and powerful.
Yeah, we bought a lot of podcasts this year, and I think it's still an evolving space where it's just exploded so quickly. They have introduced dynamic insertion, but I don't think that it's going to go programmatic. They're actually having like a podcasting upfront this year to really sell a lot of that inventory ahead of time. So I agree with Matt. I think that one of the best parts about the podcast sponsorship is the sponsor read.
The host reads.
Yeah, the host read it makes it feel really natural.
Well, one thing to that, and I don't know on how much these podcasting are making for revenue, but if they're only doing the reading the scripts while they're on, but what are they monetizing? Can they have more revenue coming in if they were to go on a programmatic standpoint?
I think it totally depends on the podcast. I mean, some of the bigger ones I think are making a good amount, and the smaller ones are struggling to sell it directly. And yeah, they'd probably benefit from that.
Yeah, and you have all that post-roll inventory that most direct advertisers don't want. So you'll end up seeing it, the poorer quality inventory showing up in a programmatic space, at least initially.
Although oddly enough, even with the host reads, which are wonderful, and they leverage the intimacy of podcasting, now the host reads are where you've got somebody like Gilbert Gottfried reading about high thread count sheets in his podcast. I've actually heard this, and so the host reads actually get really weird after a while as a strange collection of sponsors start moving into the space.
That's right.
Right. Natalie, panel, thank you very much. That was great stuff. I really appreciate it. And we're going to move to roundtables, and Matt's you're going to run the roundtable on this topic. But before we leave, I want to thank everybody, all of our speakers, panelists, those of you who had some great questions throughout the last few days. Thank you very much. And of course, we can't do this without our sponsors. So special shout outs to Gum Gum, Admore, Epiphany, Pandora, Sovereign, and Exchange Lab. Thank you very much for the support. We're going to break for our round.
Wait, what about Steve Smith? How about a round of applause for Steve Smith? Steve Smith, our programmer. That guy. Can't do it without you, man. I was the voice of God for a second there.
That's right. So our roundtables we'll do cross-channel metrics. Paul Willie is going to do that one, and that is, where's that? Right back there. And then we're going to do the post-web programmatic, and Matt is going to do that one right over here. So listen, safe trip, everybody.